No, eso es keto.
Hello, and welcome to New Athens live from the bunker. Presenting tonight a new episode for you of Current Affairs and the State of the World Today, called hashtag GoVidiots. I think it's time to move on from COVIDiots to the idiocy of the government. And we've seen in the past week some of the chaos and confusion that's reigned in Number 10 and across the government in terms of their advice to the public on what we should and shouldn't be doing. I'm Laurenzo Mefsut. Welcome. I'm the founder of the New Athens, the blockchain think tank. Here tonight in the studio is Dan Kolupski, our analyst and expert in geopolitics and history and the law, who will be producing for us now a new set of videos in the style of Vox on geopolitics. Dan, what have you been doing this week?
Oh, it's been a good week. How have you been doing?
I'm very, very well. We're still in the chaos. We're still in that moment of unknowing. What are we supposed to do? Where are we supposed to go? Where are we not supposed to go? Should we use public transport? Should we not be using public transport? Should we be using private transport? And we have some reflections to begin with from Farid Zakaria, we found on Facebook the other day, making some pronouncements about the current situation.
I actually read an interesting article about airlines.
Yes.
And apparently airlines make most of their income off of executive flights and business flights.
Yeah.
So because those
very narrow margins.
Whenever they need to go, they need to go. It's not like booking in advance or finding good deals, right? It's just like, I got a trip, that's it. You got to make it to London, you got to make it to New York, San Francisco. So they typically fly business class. So when you were saying use public or private transport, what might happen is that those guys might just start using charter jets and private jets and so on instead of flying commercial. So for us regular consumers, it's all right because most people might be so cautious about flying somewhere that we might actually get great deals. Yeah. But airlines are going to get hit because they depend on the execs flying around. And they might start using alternative modes of transport because they're very cautious about COVID.
Yeah, look, you have a spectrum. You've got at the top, you've got private jets, helicopters, the super rich class, all of whom now asking us the taxpayer to bail out their businesses, like Virgin with Richard Branson, who said he'd put up his private island, Necker Island, as a security against loans to keep Virgin Airlines afloat. Now, is that going to happen? We're not sure. Is it going to fall past the C-bills issue that we were discussing earlier this week? We're not clear. But
imagine he loses his private island. What is he going to do?
I know. Where can
man needs a private
man of means?
Yeah.
Yes. It's like the start of Pride and Prejudice, isn't it? Every man. It is a truth universally acknowledged that every man in possession of a private island is in want of a wife.
Yeah.
So where are we going with this? So we have a video to queue up from Facebook. Farid Zakaria commenting on what he sees as the economic problem.
I think so many of the people who we deal with live in a digital economy in which they can work from home. Their jobs in large part can continue in some way or the other. Okay, maybe you lose some business, but there is a much greater degree of stability But for the vast majority of people who are losing their jobs, they're losing their jobs because their work can't be digitized. And I think it's important to recognize this is creating its own kind of new inequality, an equality between the digital economy and the material economy, between knowledge workers and non-knowledge workers, which maps on rather, tragically in similar ways to the old inequalities, in which people who were knowledge workers did well and people who were working with their hands did not. How do you make sure that perspective and that voice is remembered? Unfortunately, the structural reality is that the digital economy will do even better out of this recovery, because people will learn that they can buy groceries online when they might have not wanted to do that beforehand, and the little mom and pop store on the street corner might lose more business as a result of it. So it's all the more reason to try to remind people that we're all in this together. There are probably a lot of people there who are feeling pain and who are experiencing massive dislocations in their lives. And I think it's important to recognize that. It's important for the government to help to treat this as a kind of disaster relief program, not as a traditional stimulus. This is a case where, frankly, the government forced these businesses, for understandable reasons, but forced these businesses not to operate or force these people not to go to work. And it is incumbent on the government to provide assistance. Now, what are the opportunities? Unfortunately, they're mostly in the digital realm. But I do want to stress, this is very tough on a lot of people, and unfortunately, I think the part we are going to find more difficult than people are imagining is that restart button. You're not going to just push a button and get the economy going again.
So there we go. The situation discussed for us by the Borg, by the centralized powers of CNN and TED Talks. He says we're all in this together, but of course, no, we're not. And then we have this sort of happy clappy, look out for others, copy paste political marketing, but it's very, very dark. How do you make sure that perspective and that voice is remembered, he asks. And surely, well, in the eyes of Fareed Zakaria, it is definitely Fareed Zakaria, Tribune of the People. Losing their jobs because their work can't be digitized shows us that there's an inequality between the digital economy and the material economy. But this is inverted. The real workers continue to work, and the government has started almost banning their work. This is why we're seeing from Boris Johnson, Matt Hancock, such mixed messages, because there are two levels here. Zakaria is right that there is a mismatch between the material economy and the now sort of battery farmed, home working, digital knowledge economy, which we were supposed to be moving into. But as Elon said the other day on Joe Rogan, we're forgetting we've got to make things, and if the real economy grinds to a halt, all of the, as what Douglas Adams would call the, telephone cleaners who go on the second great colony ship into the stars, they will cease to function. And we'll be relying on, sort of marketing executives. And oh, look, as we said earlier this week, with the GDP graph of the average Western worker versus the financialized economy, which is providing this kind of halo, this buoyancy of financial products, which allow us to think that we're doing well, when in fact all of the manufacturing is moving to China. What we're seeing is this breakaway civilization, and that's what that graph really represents: a breakaway civilization. Now, we can see with Zakaria that he's not so far from the truth. They have been trying to paper over the inadequacies of their response with this fake blitz spirit kind of parody, which we discussed before, of dig for England rather than paying people significantly enough to harvest farm products to provide us with food and the logistics we need. Boris Johnson saying work at home unless you can't work at home is a message which is falling between two stools. He's trying both to address the bourgeois stay-at-home workers and the train drivers, the bus drivers, the logistics hauliers, the longshoremen, the people working in factories and in food supply who need to continue working.
You know what Marx said?
Mm-hmm.
History repeats itself. First as a tragedy, then as a farce.
Yes, first as tragedy, then as farce. And now we're certainly in farce. Hence our new hashtag GoVidiots. I think we can make it viral. Certainly, it seems to be trending a little, and we're going to make it trend more. Let's share it out.
You know who he was referring to?
Mm-hmm.
Napoleon III.
Well, I mean, one thing we should see in a second, I'll find it in a moment, is JFK's greatest speech to the newspaper man. Have we got that? Let's see if we've got that. Tell us a bit about where you're at, Dan. I'll find this thing.
The economy is going to be different. First of all, we're probably unlikely to see the resurgence of global supply chains.
Yes.
Which means that the global recovery might not be as well as it was in 2008. So the United States is not going to want to contribute to global recovery. China might not be in the position to contribute to the global recovery as it did in 2008. And therefore, we might hit a period similar to the 1870s when we have a long depression.
Mm. Here we go. I found it.
Europe has not been growing since 2008 effectively, only the Eastern European countries. So quite likely this region is going to remain stagnant. And the emerging economies which were based in Asia might not have financing from Western metropoles.
Well, just today we saw the trade war between China and America has ramped up. Donald Trump, this is from the Daily Fail, Donald Trump ramps up attacks on China by banning mobile giant Huawei from access to American chip technology, risking retaliation against Apple and Boeing, who of course are participating in American supply chains. Apple and Boeing manufacture in China, and so they're going to get hit in retaliation. Well, they need to return to America if they're going to continue in the new deglobalized system of trade.
Mm-hmm. Do you reckon it's going to be a localized system of trade?
Yeah, as we were discussing with our geopolitics video earlier this week, we're seeing spheres of influence return. So, firstly, we had if we look at geopolitics since Napoleon, and we'll be premiering this video later in the weekend. Napoleon fell. We need to finish this. Napoleon fell, and then you have. And then you had the great game played between the Russian Empire and the British Empire on land and on sea. Then once Russia was plunged into the Soviet revolution and then the rise of the Soviet system.
The great game continued in the form of the Cold War.
Yes. And so America rose. Britain became a satellite of America and inside its sphere of influence. Then it was America versus the USSR. The USSR declined in 1991 and became Russia. And then China has risen as the new player in the great game, humiliated for a century of British colonial rule, when between 1897 and 1997, the British had that colony of Hong Kong, which they gave back to China in 1997 under Chris Patton, who we met a few years ago. We can see that the Chinese sleeping dragon has awoken. Crouching tiger, sleeping dragon being one of the first sort of cultural exports that we saw of this new flowering of China, looking back to ancient China where they invented loads of things. And now we're seeing this resurgent trade war because America created another problem for itself. Firstly, in the Middle East, Charlie Wilson's war, creating Osama bin Laden, the disturbance in the Middle East in the 70s and 80s, creating Saddam Hussein, both of which became problems for them later on and plunged them into the quandary of their first decade of this.
And now a much more existential threat.
And now they've made, since 1970, Henry Kissinger has made China. And on the topic of global governance, I think we have another interesting little video from a woman who I've discovered quite recently on YouTube. Her name is the amazing Polly, and she does a lot of very in-depth analysis, which I've been really obsessed by. And I think we should be watching more of. That's the second video, Ollie, in the group. Got that?
Yeah.
Great. Have we got that? Maybe we haven't.
Almost.
Or did I send it to you?
Facebook. No.
No, that's the Sorry, that's the Facebook one. Let me give you this one again. Sorry, therefore we have a little teething trouble. There we
Through
go.
the dead air, Dan.
There we
I
go.
was reading an interesting book. Have you read Paul Kennedy's The Rise and Fall of Great Powers?
No.
Great introduction to the 500-year relationship between economics and military power.
Yeah.
So he starts from the point in time when Europe starts exploring the rest of the world, the New World, and at this period, the Ming Empire kind of is the dominant power.
Seen before, I'm instantly drawn to.
I'm distracted by this. What is that?
So,
Anyways, back to what your favorite character, Kissinger. It was interesting. You have it in 1968. Both the USSR and the United States lose credibility.
yeah.
The United States, because they're in Vietnam,
Yeah.
because they're bombing the shit, out of Cambodia and North Vietnam using chemical weapons. And you got the Summer of Love, and at the same year, the Soviet Union invades Czechoslovakia because they want to create socialism with a human face. So you have this interesting period where they enter the détente because both of them lose their credibility. The United States, satellite empire in Europe, basically starts to federalize in the form of the EEC. And de Gaulle starts to speak against the exorbitant privilege of the United States to keep a unchecked deficit of printing as much money as they want.
Yeah.
Because of the Bretton Woods system.
Yes.
And the French economy was growing, not enough for it to actually challenge the United States. It was still only about like 3 or 4% in output. But it's still, nonetheless, it's the fact that he had attitude.
Yeah.
And France would speak on behalf of all of Western Europe. Couldn't really do anything about that because they were the only, let's put it this way, nation in Europe with attitude in spite of their historical experiences. They just refused to accept it.
So if we play the video, we've actually got some European news.
I have some booms for you today. Booms relating to the world of global public health and specifically related to the pandemic. By the end, I'm sure you'll see why we call it plandemic. I've already done videos about this, I know, but this is all new information and I haven't seen some of this covered anywhere. The information is going to include new background on Event 201, on Anthony Fauci. We're going to talk more about Bill Gates and some of the characters we've already discussed. But what is being revealed, not just by myself, but tons of excellent research out there. But what is being revealed, in my opinion, is that the world of global public health in general, is run like a mafia. It's like there's a Don somewhere and he's got all these families that go by NGO names, that go by world body names. These are like mafia families. And they're using money laundering and extortion and a kind of a protection racket scheme to cripple nation states and at the same time, of course, enrich themselves. So that's where we're going today. And like I say, boom, boom, boom. I believe there's some really shocking information in here. The only way I know how to tell this story to you is to kind of go through how I discovered it. And so the first thing that led me to what I'm going to cover today was this. I don't know if you caught this thing. It was a 2.5 hour long telethon sort of thing. This pledging event, they called it, hosted by Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the EU. Over the course of this 2.5 hours, they had a whole string of world leaders that sounded like they were reading hostage notes, that they were given a script and they had to read this thing to the camera and give up, in the end, $8 billion of taxpayer money, all told from all of their citizens. So you and I are paying for this thing. Just listen to a select few world leaders and what it sounded like to listen to them.
Better diagnostics, treatments, and a safe and effective vaccine.
COVID-19 diagnostics, therapeutics, and vaccines.
Largement du développement et du déploiement rapide de diagnostics, vaccins et traitements efficaces.
Universal access to vaccination, treatment, and diagnostics.
Equitable access to new COVID diagnostics, therapeutics, and vaccine.
We must all work together on improving diagnostics, accelerating therapies, and ultimately developing a vaccine.
We need to make vaccines, treatment, and diagnostics accessible to everyone.
Vaccines, treatments, and diagnosis will be the most effective way to do it.
We need new diagnostics, vaccines, treatments, and an equal distribution to all.
On equitable access to diagnostics, treatments, and vaccines.
And affordability of the vaccines, therapeutics, and diagnostics.
In order to develop adequate treatments and vaccine.
I don't know about you, but that was embarrassing for me to hear them back to back saying basically the same thing that they were obviously told to say.
Hostage taking. We saw kind of hostage taking of these world leaders, European leaders. This is the continuing function of the EU, is as a brokerage for this global governance that we're seeing that's coming out of America, through the Chinese Communist Party, through its and Gates's funding of the WHO and the UN institutions, and now recruiting into this group, the EU governance, which has been losing its head. It's been running around like a headless chicken. They were talking about, again, European solidarity. They cut off the borders from one another, the end of the Schengen zone. They cut off supplies of medical supplies from one another, and then you saw Italy's economy, as people have been phoning in the past week, telling us Italy's economy is going down. They can't borrow enough money. You were saying this to yourself, Dan. What's going on here when Ursula von der Leyen has this kind of hostage-taking script that she has all these people read out? What do you make of it? Certainly to me, it seemed very odd.
What other information they're going to get for it?
So
they're going to share a single policy, right? I mean, what's so surprising about that?
Well, what's surprising about it is where the money is coming from and where it goes. So what you're seeing with this coordination under the WHO is what our friend Polly is calling money laundering, what our friend Polly is calling the robbing of taxpayers to put into a super fund for this World Health concept, which is taking the money out of the hands of the people of the countries, giving it to NGOs, UN institutions, and funneling it off into various projects, which then don't have that connection back to the people who are voting for the governments. What we saw with the EU, and I was very interested to see, it was Claire Fox on the Spiked magazine podcast a few weeks ago, saying that she had been elected as an MEP at last May's at last May's EU elections and had gone into the EU institutions and found that they played a very specific game. And that game was each member state government would go to the council and say back to their own people, oh, the EU's tied our hands. We can't do anything but participate in the law that they're bringing about, which is going to be imposed on our nation. And so it's impossible for us to do anything other than stay within this EU provision of services. We've got to pay huge amounts of money in. We can't use our veto because there's no reason. And what it is there's an EU governing class who actually don't like having to be politicians in their home countries. They much prefer being politicians in the EU. They much prefer playing that game. And actually, the elites that go to the EU into the council are those who primarily have the same interests. And these are pan-European governing interests. Things like, the stability of the ECB and the euro and frictionless trade and population exchange, all of these things that the people of these countries actually are opposed to. But what's really special, what Claire Fox found out, was that the differential gear they're using is, oh, the EU have tied our hands. We can't do anything about it. Actually, this is the policy they want. This is the policy they want, and because they share it with their class, which is the EU governing class. But they can tell their peoples, oh, we tried to represent your interests in the council, but we didn't work out. So unfortunately, we've got to go along with it. So it's that kind of differential gearing of, oh, well, I am your representative in our homeland, but I'm also trying to do our best for you in the EU. When what they want in the EU is the EU policy. This is why you're seeing rebellions in Poland and France over the Gilets jaunes, and in Hungary and in Italy and all across Europe, and Britain left, of course. But fundamentally, we're still in the same bracket in this transition phase, as we've seen with the opening of the borders. What do you make of EU governance now? You were saying the other day that you think these bailout bonds are not going to work, that we're not going to see European solidarity much longer. But this is now another round, right? This is why we wanted to show you.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to see testing times for the European Union. We're going to probably see, again, like everyone always predicts the end of the Eurozone, but yeah, it's going to be complicated. What Germany always likes is stable inflation, low inflation, and what Italy really needs is inflationary politics.
Yes.
To water down their debt, to get their people working, to make their goods more internationally competitive. Yeah, you have, the geographical systems below the Andes and the Alps are not only just a natural barrier which divide north and south of Europe, but also they just happen to encompass economic regions which need completely different prescriptions.
Yes, so I mean, you can see it in Weber talking about Protestant, Puritan Northerners who have a work ethic versus laissez-faire Catholics in the South, and that works in America, as you say, on the American continent with North and South and Central America. North America being a Protestant home of work and industry, and the South being more Catholic and more laissez-faire, more mañana in its attitude. And you can see the same with Europe and the way the EU has turned out with the euro has been to punish Catholic and Orthodox nations for not being Puritan, work ethic, hardworking, elect of God, who think that getting richer will get you into heaven.
Well, I mean, also what happens is that Germany, which has been historically, well, since the Second Industrial Revolution, a manufacturing powerhouse, and has been a manufacturing powerhouse at the beginning of the European community, the coal and steel community, and the common market, and so on. So, yeah, obviously they expanded the market by allowing Poland, Greece, Bulgaria, Romania to enter. But what happens is that when all of these countries adopt a single currency, okay, Poland's not part of this, but Spain and Italy, Greece are, is that what happens is that German goods are more internationally competitive than they would be under the Deutsche Mark, because those countries are kind of weighing down the value of the euro while Germany is pushing it up.
Yes.
And what you have is a nice middle ground for German manufacturing goods to be exported under a more competitive price than they would be if Germany had its own currency.
Yeah, and
so they really like
tariff barriers, yes, which is why I mean I
under this situation, and that's why Germany really doesn't like inflationary policies as one reasons is because that will affect its current account balance.
Yeah, and an EU with Germany carrying the can for not just Greece but all of the Catholic nations is not an EU that can really continue. Now I'm getting questions in from Katia and from other friends of the show, and also all throughout this week, who've been asking, what's the virus story? So to get back to the pandemic and to get back to some of our research about the virus itself, our first horseman, the horseman of the plague, from our 4 horsemen of the Chipocalypse animation from last time, we found a problem in the consciousness of people who are coming to understand how the Institute of Virology in Wuhan works. Oh, here we go. Here's the 4 horsemen of the Chipocalypse by Savetsyov, the Russian painter, and we're at the first horseman now, the plague, which is really what we've been embroiled in the past couple of months, this past year, the start of the year, and we really need to come to an understanding of it. So what the story that's being honed down now, and it's appearing across the mainstream media in recent weeks, has been American money from DARPA comes through the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. North Carolina invites the Chinese biochemists and bioweapons developing research scientists over to Chapel Hill to have conferences and papers on coronaviruses from bats. These bat coronaviruses then taken to Wuhan to set up a level 4 biolab, which has the ability to study them in detail outside of the American sphere of influence, getting back to your sphere of influence's point. Now, gain of function, as we've been discussing on the show, is when you develop a disease and you give it more abilities to harm humans, whether it's developing it through humanized mice, which are a serious issue. And we've been discussing this. We found out about it from an epidemiologist who appeared on Joe Rogan a few weeks ago. We'll link that later. But that really strikes you. A humanized mouse. What is a humanized mouse? A humanized mouse is a mouse's genome has been manipulated in the lab to more resemble the human biome, the human anatomy, to viruses, to bacteria, to the diseases that they're studying. Now, what I didn't understand at that point, but which that humanized mouse point really brought home to me, was that studying for a disease to cure it is the other side of the coin of that is weaponizing that disease. So to cure something, you need to understand its functions, and to understand its functions, you're reverse engineering them, and that is weaponizing the disease in itself. That task is the same. So what you can't do in the West under normal rules of WHO and so on is gain of function, which is where you take that disease and you add more elements to it, which will allow it to affect humans more than it did in the wild when you discovered it. So what we found with the coronavirus from bats, it was given to the Wuhan lab, and the function, the gain of function that occurred was a kind of HIV delivery system. It seems that people who've been studying it are working out that it stays under the radar in the human body like HIV until this flowering of AIDS, and then it strips your immune system, and then it kills you with a common cold. the next infection that comes across you, you die of. And so he has this sort of under the radar notion. I was speaking today with a surgeon, close friend of the show, who's been working in the Nightingale in the Excel Center, and he said of hydroxychloroquine and remdesivir that they are useful as treatments most at the early stages of the infection. And because of the lack of testing in Britain especially, but also in America and other places, these drugs are not being administered early enough in the life cycle so that they can shear off the corona while it's in its HIV dormant stage before it's like AIDS a stage where it really harms the body. That's why you're seeing what Cameron Carl Siddell called happy hypoxia, which is now coming into mainstream media and medicine on the topic, which we'll explain in a minute when we see his videos. But the important thing we can derive now is this notion of gain of function. Why would the Americans with American money, including Anthony Fauci, this wizard who's controlling all of the American press conferences in the White House as the chief medic in America right now, the CDC and NIAIS, which are the major governing bodies of medicine across the United States. Why would he be funding millions of dollars with his organizations, his NGOs, the kind that we're seeing in that Leiden video that's been pledged by these nations into these NGO organizations? And then why is that money going over to China, to Wuhan? People have been asking me this, and I think it requires an explanation now, because they're saying, well, okay, if we have Dan's great game theory, if we have Dan's notion that we are seeing powers facing off against one another, whether it be the USSR and America or now China and America, why would American bioweapons be being developed in a level 4 lab in Wuhan? That has been puzzling to people. Many friends of the show have asked me about this. And so what needs to then be explained is the breakaway civilization, is this notion of how are we moving beyond this great game now with the rise of the internet, with the rise of the social credit system, with the rise of globalized trade, as we've discussed before, in terms of China manufacturing for the West, and then taking the profits out of the West back into China to share with the corporations and the elites. Why are we not seeing that weapons of mass destruction that are being developed with American money are being developed in what you might see as the rival of America? That's been puzzling people. And so this then is where we arrive at the amazing Polly and her notion of the hostage countries. They're all pledging their money, taxpayer money, to go into this NGO structure, which she calls, globalist money laundering, and then to fund these global health initiatives away from the accountability that these governments have to their own peoples. It's totally outside. If you're in Estonia, if you're in Monaco, if you're in Switzerland, as we saw in Italy, Portugal, whatever, and you funnel money into an international body, then your people are not able to audit where that's going, what it's for, how it's delivered, and whether it can be used for their own national benefit. Now, one thing I thought we should do is go back to the start. And we spoke a little bit about Marx earlier. I have here the original speech, which we can have a look at now. And this is coming to you now, Ollie. This is, to introduce it, it's JFK speaking on April the 27th, 1961. So in the middle of his term before his death. And he is talking to the Association of the Press in New York City. It's a dinner. It's an after dinner speech. He comes in, he's giving a beautifully witty speech about Karl Marx. And so when we're ready to queue up, I think we can go and listen to what
Remarks of the President to the American Newspaper Publishers Association, Waldorf Astoria Hotel, New York City, April 27, 1961.
Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate very much your generous invitation to be here tonight. You bear heavy responsibilities these days, and the article I read some time ago reminded me of how particularly heavily the burdens of present-day events bear upon your profession. You may remember that in 1851, the New York Herald Tribune, under the sponsorship and publishing of Horace Greeley, employed as its London correspondent an obscure journalist by the name of Karl Marx. We are told that foreign correspondent Marx, stone broke, and with a family ill and undernourished, constantly appealed to Greeley and managing editor Charles Dana for an increase in his munificent salary of $5 per installment, a salary which he and Engels ungratefully labeled as the lousiest petty bourgeois cheating. But when all his financial appeals were refused, Marx looked around for other means of livelihood and fame, eventually terminating his relationship with the Tribune and devoting his talents full-time to the cause that would bequeath to the world the seeds of Leninism, Stalinism, revolution, and the Cold War. If only this capitalistic New York newspaper had treated him more kindly, if only Marx had remained a foreign correspondent, history might have been different. And I hope all publishers will bear this lesson in mind the next time they receive a poverty-stricken appeal from a small increase in the expense account from an obscure newspaper man. I have selected as the title of my remarks tonight, "The President and the Press." Some may suggest that this would be more naturally worded, "The President versus the Press," but those are not my sentiments tonight. It is true, however, that when a well-known diplomat from another country demanded recently that our State Department repudiate certain newspaper attacks on his colleagues, it was unnecessary for us to reply that this administration was not responsible for the press, for the press had already made it clear that it was not responsible for this administration. Nevertheless, my purpose here tonight is not to deliver the usual assault on the so-called one-party press. On the contrary, in recent months, I have rarely heard any complaints about political bias in the press, except from a few Republicans. Nor is it my purpose tonight to discuss or defend the televising of presidential press conferences. I think it is highly beneficial to have some 20 million Americans regularly sit in on these conferences to observe, if I may say so, the incisive, the intelligent, and the courteous qualities displayed by your Washington correspondents. Nor finally.
So the start of this speech, we on? Yeah. So the start of this speech, you can see he has the meeting out of the palm of his hand. He says that Marx was an ignored foreign correspondent for an American newspaper, and that they should not deny their foreign correspondents their wages, lest they turn and have different kinds of careers. So he has these press people eating out of the palm of his hand throughout this first section. Then around 6 minutes in, he then changes tack and addresses his real point, which is something much darker.
In every sphere of human activity. This deadly challenge imposes upon our society two requirements of direct concern, both to the press and to the president. Two requirements that may seem almost contradictory in tone, but which must be reconciled and fulfilled if we are to meet this national peril. I refer first to the need for far greater public information, and second, to the need for far greater official secrecy. The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society, and we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it. Even today, there is little value in opposing the threat of a closed society by imitating its arbitrary restrictions. Even today, there is little value in ensuring the survival of our nation if our traditions do not survive with it. And there is very grave danger that an announced need for increased security will be seized upon by those anxious to expand its meaning to the very limits of official censorship and concealment. That I do not intend to permit to the extent that it's in my control. And no official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, civilian or military, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know. But I do ask.
Suddenly, there's deathly silence in the auditorium. He has them turned on a dime to a very serious topic, which is secret societies and secret oaths. He says, the word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society, and we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. So what we see with that is the first inkling that Kennedy is taking up the mantle of what Eisenhower had said a year or so earlier in his warning to the nation when he gave up his presidency to Kennedy, that America was becoming dominated by what he called the military-industrial complex, that there was a permanent administrative state, those actors who never get elected, and when the election shifts the politicians in the front of the stage, the chorus behind remain concealed and remain in place. We can see it in something that we'd call the establishment in this country. In the 1950s and 60s, they would call secret societies or the military-industrial complex, the administrative state, what's now called the deep state in parlance across new media. What we can see here is the dawning of this rebellion that you can see in Kennedy against the domination of secret societies, which in the end would be his and his brother's demise, and still unsolved today as to who it was that really objected to his reforms, reforms that say that a republic should be under the control of its people, and it shouldn't have secrets such that it's betraying its people, the news being censored, freedom of speech being curtailed. This is what we're seeing today. We have people being banned from social media platforms, which are the new printing press, the new multilateral means of us engaging with one another in the internet on these social media platforms. Now, looking at the history of the internet, I think that's another angle by which we can examine these concerns of where we are today. These social engineers who created the internet and who still keep control over our societies didn't know what kind of anarchy, what kind of freedom they were unleashing when they created the Open Internet Protocol within DARPA. It was called ARPANET to begin with, the precursor to DARPA. So it was an American military information exchange system, which was then with TCP/IP opened up to the public. And what you can see is that with decades of freedom and free exchange of ideas in a more open internet, we're now seeing the clawing back. We're now seeing this moment where the taps are turned off on free expression through YouTube, through Facebook, through Google, through various Twitter bannings. You can see it. You can see across the political spectrum that non-mainstream thought and speech is slowly being shut down. And one way of thinking about that is the boiling frog. We're more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to change our habits. If you throw a frog into a pot of boiling water, it'll jump out. But if you heat cold water slowly with the frog sitting in it, it will allow itself to be boiled to death, even though it could as easily jump out. Are you seeing that at the moment, Dan? Are you seeing that kind of lack of questioning, lack of understanding that the media is kind of closing the net?
Yeah, I have big issues with the BBC, for example. Britain, in my opinion, and I'm not British, so it's wrong for me to say it, but I think it's a brainwashed nation by and large. And what is really funny, for example, is how there is some sense of exceptionalism in the Anglo-Saxon tradition of liberalism, whereby people think is like everybody else is brainwashed but us. So you go to China and they laugh at the portraits of Mao Zedong everywhere. But if you're not British and you visit London, you laugh at the portraits of Winston Churchill everywhere. But he's a hero. You're not going to question him. It's just the way he's instilled in the national mindset. But with the National Health Service, it's a crap service, as we saw the statistics with. It's underfunded and there's not enough doctors. And the problems in the medical infrastructure of the UK is not going to be solved by increasing the budget. You need to completely restructure it.
You were telling us about Eastern European medicine, and a lot of our friends, our Russian friends and Ukrainian friends, have been going to Russia to receive treatment.
It's cheaper, first of all, and it's more efficient. It's easier to get to see the doctor there. But firstly, let me deal with the point is the media closing in? Yeah. There is not enough news sources, right? And the ones which there are all kind of wishy-washy. So apart from the BBC, you get France 24, and Al Jazeera, Russia Today, CNN, and they're okay. But I mean, the BBC could easily have a financial BBC, business BBC, cultural BBC, right? I mean, they have the funds to do that.
Yeah.
It's not, it's always doom and gloom, and we should be really supportive of the NHS, and you should stand up, and you're going to be an enemy of the people if you don't clap for the NHS at 8:00. It's kind of crazy. It's kind of ridiculous and absurd.
Well, I mean, a few months ago, there was talk in the government of massive funding for the NHS, and now that's kind of gone by the wayside. The opposition was saying that the massive funding increases that were promised by the government with the NHS were not enough, and that we should see yet more.
Yeah, but the opposition are always going to say that. The point is that if you look at how many doctors there are per person in the United Kingdom, it's much less than in Israel, Australia, or even Eastern European former Soviet countries, which has had a much better medical policy because of the command economy in terms of providing state healthcare. In other aspects, the command economy failed tremendously. In terms of healthcare, it sort of makes sense when you could control all resources to provide healthcare. This country is most of the money that goes to the NHS goes to a bureaucracy. They're by their nature inefficient, so they don't go to the doctors or hospitals. they go to administrators, which send you out letters to tell you that your next appointment will be in 6 months, and it'll probably be canceled, and then it'll be rescheduled for 5 months after that.
Yes. Instead of queuing up, you were telling us before, queuing up to see a doctor.
So in a
might
clinic,
be queuing the whole day.
So, for example, in this country, you need to see a GP, which will then refer you to whichever specialist
you're being
you need
triaged in the GP system.
In at least in my experience in Ukraine, you walk into a clinic, the nearest one next to you, and you figure out which floor and corridor is the specialist you need to see. So if you got skin problems, you go to the dermatology department, and there's probably a few offices there with a bench outside, and usually it's a few grandmothers out there. So you would wait. You literally just sit there on the bench and you'd wait until the doctor could see you. It could take 2 hours. It could take half an hour. It could take 15 minutes. You could just get a number out, but you could see him on that day. And you could lose half a day. That's true, but at least you'll see him on that day, and you'll get your recipe. You'll get your, you could go to the pharmacy, you get your prescription, you get everything you need. And he'll see you, you know what's wrong with you, rather than going on the NHS webpage for you trying to track down what's wrong with you to narrow down the problem, as if you're medically qualified to do that.
Yes, I mean we can see some innovations in telemedicine, perhaps when we can phone in and have a video conference with a triage doctor, and maybe that can make that more efficient. As you say, turning up with his.
Just have more doctors.
Yeah.
Just make the requirements to get into med school different, because a lot of people want to go into med school, right? It's just some of them can't, and they have to study biology instead, or some other kind of suboptimal stuff. So increase the amount of med schools, or at least make kids learn specialized areas of medicine
rather than general practice, which is becoming this kind of catch-all territory to gatekeep.
But they still will need to learn some form of specialized medicine if they want to advance in the profession. So it's essentially all the GPs you have could be specialized in whatever field they should be or they want to be. I don't think they get particularly. I don't think they're happy people being GPs.
No, it's not a premium. It's not a premium specialism. It's not a premium specialism at all. And so what you see is this kind of gatekeeping of patients. So you're kept away from the specialists. I mean, okay, if you don't know that your problem is a shoulder problem or whether it's a lung problem or a rib problem,
you'd probably know. You'd probably know because your shoulder hurts. You wouldn't go to the GP for him to ask you what's you like. I know. Look, I have a swollen shoulder. It's fucking green. Okay, it's broken. I could feel it. I can't move my arm. You know where the problem is.
Yes.
If you know it's on your skin, you go to the doctor, and then he tells you what it is, right? You don't need to see
outliers. These are you're right that when you don't know what it is, that's an outlier and not a reason to have a whole administrative layer in the middle. So we've been talking to our friends in there we go. Somebody calling in. So we've been talking to our friends in the medical profession who've been variously in the Nightingale Hospital, in the Excel Centre, which has now been mothballed, while people were dying in ICUs around the nation. Those beds were empty, which were of the same grade of ICU provision of care for emergency COVID patients. It became a training centre, and the attempt was, it was laughed out of court on all fronts. The attempt was to train air hostesses to be ICU or ITU nursing providers, which was that didn't work. So it didn't take up the strain from hospitals. Hospitals have stopped treating cancer patients, have stopped treating patients with heart surgery and calling it an elective surgery. And then when people come into the hospital, they get COVID and die. It's become a real problem in this crisis, and none of the medics can do anything because of hospital protocols. None of the government entities seem to be answering these questions in a way that's efficient and functional. And we're falling into this trap where now friends of the show are calling us saying patients who are not being treated and are COVID positive are being sent to care homes, Bupa care homes. The NHS is paying those Bupa care homes, and we have whistleblowers coming to us from Bupa care homes across Britain saying that patients are being parked in sidings, in these sort of death sidings in the Bupa care homes, because the NHS can't or won't treat their condition. They don't think they're viable patients for the ICU, or they've been transferred out so more people can come in behind them, not using these Nightingale hospitals to their full capacity. Patients parked in care homes to die without treatment, and testimony that's really brutally tragic of neglect, of impossible levels of indignity on the part of patients who are denied access to their relatives because of the infectiousness of the disease, but also as a corollary from that, denied advocacy of their relatives because a patient is not compos mentis. A patient can't advocate for their own treatment and for their own recovery. They've got to have family around to do that. And now we've got no family in medical care centres. We've got this gap. And so patients are being DNR'd. They are being sent to Bupa care homes. Bupa's being paid to take those patients who otherwise could be in hospital beds because they're over capacity, and then those patients being left to die without treatment. Now, a lot of them are infirm, and we've done an examination.
My mom's watching the video.
Oh, how's Kitty Cat? Hey, say hey, Kitty Cat, how are you? What we're seeing is a kind of catch-22, really, where if you look at the criteria under which the NHS can deny, and we have the documentation, we can put it up in the links later. If you look at the criteria under which the NHS can deny care to patients, explicitly illegal is discrimination on the basis of age, infirmity, or frailty. So what we're seeing is a ban, so if you had a watershed, if you had the example that's given in the NHS documentation, if you have an age-based watershed such that you will treat to the full extent of their health, their ability to take treatment, somebody who's age 69, but somebody age 71 is parked in a care home and not treated and left to die. That's explicitly illegal and discriminatory, which makes a lot of sense. What they say is you can't have an age cutoff explicitly in their rules. Age, frailty, and disability are not relevant medical criteria by which you can decide treatment provision. They say refer to another document, which we can link, which gives those criteria for medically relevant concerns as to whether treatment should be provided or withdrawn on the part of medical professionals. And this is all to protect medical professionals from being sued, and part of the protocol to prevent litigation. Now, in that list of three medically relevant criteria, it includes whether the treatment will kill you, whether the treatment will make you better, and the third of those three criteria is age, infirmity, and disability, in another set of words. So it's illegal to discriminate by age, infirmity, or disability on the face of it, but through another tree of logic, these three gates, you can get back around to the same result. It's just you've got to justify it in a different way in the administrative schema of form filling, box checking. And what we realized the other day was that it's back to Little Britain again. Computer says no. We're going through a moment of crisis in medical provision because the computer says no. Dan, we have a response saying, unfortunately, medical students are just trained to be pharmaceutical salespeople. And another from Mariella saying, absolutely agree. It's the same in Bulgaria, and Bulgaria is not as good as Ukraine. So we're getting corroboration from over Europe.
Really, Bulgaria? I would assume Bulgaria is better than Ukraine, but who knows?
So we looked at some of the statistics, tragic statistics. Hospital deaths in England to 5 p.m. on the 5th of May 2020. Now the shocking total of deaths was 22,049 casualties, which is astonishingly sad. We were speaking earlier with our friend Professor Nicholas Jackson O'Shaughnessy, who we made our propaganda documentary with. You can see it on the channel. We'll be making more videos with him soon. And he was comparing the COVID crisis to the Blitz, and that amongst the Blitz of and the Battle of Britain in 1940 and V1s and V2 rockets, in the total casualties in that period were around 60,000. So we're entering the order of magnitude of Blitz casualties. But they're demographically, as you break it down, they're very specific. Now, between 0 and 19 years of age, this is hospital deaths in England to the 5th of May. In between 0 and 19 years of age, 11 people have died. Between ages of 20 and 39 years of age, 155 people have died. So in hospitals, 166 young people to the age of 40 have sadly died of this coronavirus. And that's not to the level of flu deaths in that demographic. That's the sad comparison point is that's one plane crash. That's a really horrible plane crash full of young people. Now, on the economic front, under 40s, huge proportion of the workforce, education, and buoying up the economy. On the day of that terrible plane crash, with 166 casualties, planes don't not fly that day. The aviation industry doesn't shut down that day or for several months afterwards. And certainly the whole economy doesn't shut down on that day or for several months afterwards. And so we've seen with the Swedish policies, which have been relatively successful with common sense and consent containing the spread of COVID-19, that Britain is really entering COVID 1984, this complete shutdown of the British economy and public life, which, because of the panic spread by mainstream media, spread by the government, calling itself scientific advice, when in fact overreaction and being seen to be doing something has been the watchword of this crisis. We can see that we're not calibrated to our solution to the problem itself. And so what do you think is going to be the consequence for the economy, Dan? I mean, I've been having questions into the show from people in the hospitality industry, people in the entertainment industry, people who run restaurants, hotels, cafes, bars, clubs, people who won't get any employment for a long time, months. Even barbers are being fined £10,000 if they're caught barbering in these conditions. This is a total shutdown of industry. But now, of course, the situation has achieved this double standard where key workers across different industries have needed to stay in work, and then you have the middle classes, the knowledge economy, staying at home. And this then ties back into what we heard from Fareed Zakaria at the start, that really you can see that there was this move towards a knowledge economy, move towards universal basic income, the idea was that factories were going to be out of date, that manual work was going to be out of date, and you'd have a whole load of people who would be out of work because of it and not be able to retrain. People were being banned off Twitter for the hashtag learn to code. Hashtag learn to code was a quite laughable response to the shutdown of the industry in the Rust Belt in America, when politicians were trying to suggest that 40-year-old auto shop workers, those guys in our graph from the other day, could, instead of being auto shop workers when the auto shops move out of America, they could learn to be computer programmers and make startups, age sort of 40, a long way through their career. There were then, in pushback against this idea, there was a trending hashtag on Twitter, hashtag learn to code. And then people were being banned for life off Twitter, not for saying anything other than hashtag learn to code. That was quite astonishing, the level of suppression of even debates about economics. But universal basic income, Andrew Yang ran in the Democratic primary on the platform of a universal basic income, because we can give everybody the essentials of what they need to survive, and replicate this consumer economy ad infinitum, without really then going into detail of how you retool the economy for a digital age. But universal basic income was meant to be for factory work where there was no longer a need for personnel because of automation, AI, and digitization. And what we've seen, in fact, is that this whole notion has been inverted. This whole notion has been inverted during this COVID crisis, during COVID 1984. We've seen that actually, who's superfluous to the economy? It's the Fareed Zakarias of this world. It's the opinion piece writers. It's the marketing executives. It's all the people who can work from home, who turned out to be superfluous in this period, to the real function of society, which is providing food, providing medicine, making sure that there is public transport, even though we're not supposed to use it, and that the working class in the Western world is still so necessary and needs to be supported, rather than preached to by patrician elitists in their libraries, which is what we're seeing in the mainstream media right now.
Hashtag GoVidiots.
Oh yes, hashtag GoVidiots. Yes, that's the new hashtag which we're promoting from now on, to hold to account the decisions that have been made. Here we go. Yes, on the screen now, and we should share this, and we will start to create a snowball viral phenomenon. Now, getting into the GoVidiot initiatives that we're seeing right now. Reading from the Daily Fail today. London will have Europe's biggest car-free zone as Sadiq Khan closes some of the capital's busiest roads to encourage cycling and social distancing. Then, in the same page, Sadiq Khan is accused of forcing Londoners onto packed tubes by increasing congestion charge to £15 and lengthening its hours, while he is driven around the city in a taxpayer-funded £300,000 Range Rover. So we're seeing the breakdown. We're seeing the separation of this breakaway civilization. The patrician Fareed Zakarias in their libraries preaching to real workers. This is the breakaway civilization at work. You can see these two levels opening up, this gulf, which we saw in our graph from Piketty and from Eric Weinstein of American auto shop workers losing out in the latter half of the 20th century economy, and the financialization of Wall Street coming in to replace real work. Here we go. It's on the stream now. So this is the breakaway civilization at work. You can see this blue line breaking away from the red. The red is the real worker, the real producer of good things, goods and services that people need. And then The blue line is the speculation of the banking class, of the new global elite, which you can see then you can see diverge when Ursula von der Leyen pledges the taxpayer money from our red line to fund the transnational government organizations to promote healthcare on our blue line. So I think, as we've seen from our last episode, this graph really sums up where we are today. Does that make sense to you, Dan?
In terms of income disparities?
Yeah, and this notion of the breakaway civilization, the rich trying to form their own reality in a bubble away from the workers.
It's kind of how it's always been, I felt. Throughout civilization, it's the notion of patricians versus the plebs. It's just now.
It's international.
We don't have
it's globalized.
It's globalized because of the nature, but even the internationalized elite go and study in American and English universities typically, and they get the prestigious jobs in investment banks. There's probably a commonality between 3 or 2 generations of moneyed people.
Yeah.
New moneyed, perhaps not so much, but taste, style, what sort of the place Western culture has in global bourgeois society.
Yeah. So we're seeing this breakaway civilization. We're seeing this separation, and the international ruling class is now truly globalized, as you were saying earlier. We're seeing a split between this great powers thesis towards a transnational ruling class of.
Well, we always had, ironically, a transnational or a cosmopolitan ruling class, but this is. I mean, look at if you could find the picture of all the royal families on the eve of World War One. They're all fucking related. I mean, you couldn't have a more interconnected ruling class if they're related by blood and have a mutual great grandmother or whatever. So it's but the fact that the Kaiser is the cousin of the Tsar, who is the cousin of the king, didn't stop these empires clashing on the battlefield. So it's this is the thing with Trump and Brexit, is that the elite only has so much power to influence events until the populist kind of sentiment says enough.
Yes. And so when do you think we're going to see that tipping point? As you were saying with mainstream media, who's going to be able to carry that flame to Athens? Who's going to be able to, as it were, carry that message when we're seeing massive censorship in social media platforms, which are our only real outlet?
Oh man, I'm so old-fashioned. I don't believe in social media as an outlet. I'm very much into cafe culture.
Yes.
I mean, personal relationships. Social media has a tendency to degenerate into keyboard wars. People seek out fights in the safety of their living room. You know, they sit in their nice, comfortable chairs, revolving chairs, and they can say whatever stuff they want, and they project the person on the other side of the internet to be their enemy. And you know, and they have these kind of like rooster fights.
Yes.
But that's why it's probably unlikely for you to have genuine intellectual discussions in social media. I'm sure there is, but the ones I tend to come across, even if you agree with someone, they want you to have a fight, right? You could be saying the same things in completely different ways because everybody has a different vocabulary and a way of using words, but they will basically comment. They will, they will respond to one of your arguments and tell you your argument in a different way, but it'll feel as if they're attacking you. So it doesn't have that nature of a discussion. I don't think social media is I mean, it has. I don't think censoring social media will will be that traumatic.
Okay.
Ultimately, because it's
look. Well, where have the tipping points been? So we've seen one tipping point in 2008 with the financial crisis.
Yeah, that's an important one.
Well, that's when
and it looks like that's going to be overshadowed now.
Many people woke up to the fact that we were governed by corporations who don't act in the interests of Main Street, as they said in America, in the interests of the people. They have their own command of capital, which then feeds off the society but doesn't contribute to it.
Well, the answer to that would have been either we all as a global community regulate international commerce even more, which is unlikely, because it's sort of a slipping slope that we surrender more sovereignty in the hope that the transnational organizations could act in our favor. But we're ultimately pooling sovereignty with different value systems. So what I think would be a more ideal, this is my belief of utopia, is that we're going to shrink. The political community will descend into smaller and smaller communities, rather
smart
than
cities rather than nation states.
Well, rather than transnational blocks.
Okay.
So what would be really cool if the European Union metamorphed into a confederation of cities.
City-states, smart city-states.
Yeah. Rather than a group of nation states.
Okay.
I think like people talk about nation states as if they're something great. They're not. I don't think nation states are something great. I don't think that's I think that's also a legacy of historical oppression.
Yeah.
Where you're drilled into a standardized education, national narrative. I mean, nation states are the precursor to nationalism, not the other way around. A nation state exists before you become conscious that you belong to a particular nation, or so most people believe. Because you have a flag, a national emblem, and a public schooling system whereby you're drilled in particular values and a centralized education syllabus, which tells you that this is the history of your people and we celebrate this holiday because of such and such. So no, nationalism is not that great, in my opinion. I believe in cosmopolitanism, but in a genuine kind, not in some abstract kind of, we have common values in Europe or such and such.
So the result of that tipping point was Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, and the blockchain revolution, which we haven't seen become a major power yet.
Because blockchain, these cryptocurrencies have just basically become speculative items.
Yes.
When people lost faith in the dollar, when people lose faith in conventional currencies, typically during crises, people invest into gold. So this has become a more speculative version of gold up until it blew up in, 2018, 17, right? Because it was just ascending quite highly. So that's kind of what it's become. It's become a very fluctuating asset class rather than a store of value.
Yes.
But here's my little 10 cents.
Oh, hey, how are you?
In terms of dollars. When 1933, when America took all the gold back off the people who bought their gold.
Yes.
Something like that. I don't know exactly what happened, but I know in 1933, because of the crash, people lost faith in the dollar and they started buying gold. And
that was the first time I think they suspended the dollar gold convertibility.
Yeah. So Roosevelt had promulgated a bill by which you'd have $100,000 fine and 10 years in jail, U.S. federal penitentiary, if you didn't go and hand over your gold in the same way that the campaign now wants to hand over your guns. So you had to hand over your gold to the nearest U.S. Federal Reserve in your state, and exchange your gold for the Federal Reserve.
You mean bullion rather than just bullion. If you kept you weren't allowed to keep bullion.
Yeah, so you had to allow them to buy it back off you for what they wanted in greenback dollar bills. So they were able to take the gold into Fort Knox and create this renewed backing, asset backing for their currency at the expense of all of their citizens, who they bullied at the point of a gun into handing over their nest eggs and their stores of value, as you so rightly put it. And that was really the start of the fiat currency notion of, you can just legislate with a gun to enforce then somebody giving up their life savings. And you can see the same thing in care homes today. In fact, you can see the same kind of asset stripping when the government and private care homes together sell somebody's property for them to go into long-term care under sectioning, so that they're not allowed to leave. Their family can't take them out. They can choose which facility they're in, but they can't choose whether they're in a facility. And then as that person's life and assets are stripped at the tune of £10,000 a year and so on, until there's nothing left in the kitty, and then they are dispossessed of their career, they're dispossessed of all of their savings, of their strategy in life, which may have been to provide for their family, which may have been to provide for their family in the long term as a dynastic idea beyond the scope of their own life, and suddenly their assets stripped back by this corporate government machine of people like Bupa and the British government, who then take the assets, sell them, take the houses, sell them off. So there's nothing left in the estate of that person when they go, and use it to pay for what. And often, if you go around, as I've been around care homes, often it's hell on earth. It's like something out of Hieronymus Bosch hell. You have people shitting themselves and screaming and wandering around naked. If you go into a care home and you find this kind of this hellish chaos in many places, and these are places that people pay for out of their own money, but they can't audit that. They can't. There's no control. So you can see this kind of asset stripping, these asset stripping attempts over decades and centuries. Every generation needs a new one, and isn't it odd that the elites need to fund themselves off the little man's savings? And you can see it with getting back to where we started with Richard Branson asking for a bailout for his airline when he himself is a billionaire, with major companies being bailed out by the government and the taxpayer, when in fact it should be their owners and their shareholders who receive massive dividends who should be bailing out these corporations. Anyway, on that note, I think we've covered some ground here tonight. There are more scoops to uncover in the coming days and weeks of this chaotic time of the rise of the hashtag Covidiot, where we don't know what we're doing, we don't have a plan. And the other day we saw the furlough scheme extended several months, and the key takeaway from that is, well, if you don't have a plan, why not have a holding pattern? It's great that people are being compensated for the jobs the government is preventing them from doing. However, if there's no plan and we don't have even the public square in which we can discuss and come to a plan with an opposition that fundamentally supports government policy, tinkering around the edges with Keir Starmer's cross-examinations of Boris in the House, but fundamentally lacking in real opposition to some of the chaos and confusion that's been sown by this set of COVID 1984 policies. We're going to have to find a forum. We're going to have to find a venue to make decisions about what our nation is for, what we're going to do with ourselves. the government has taken up that mantle and has fundamentally failed in policing by consent, in bringing people into the conversation,
I don't know. You say that. I think Britain is among the most drilled and disciplined nations there is. I think their loyalty to the BBC, NHS, and all that. This is a fundamentally retired, kind of like a massive like retirement community.
So
to
you
some
think
extent, it's just they're drilled and nerd and they're happy with the way things are. Yes, there's a really strong civic society, but it's ultimately unbelievably loyal to the state and the state's media institutions.
So
there is genuinely like a very strong sense of political community, and Brexit is a very shallow cut, I think.
Yeah, I mean, there could
in terms of the South is very pro-Europe and the North is not. That's true, but there's also the financial difference.
This is a matter.
But there's also the financial difference in the fact that the South is in the orbit of London, and London is not really Britain. You know, London is a cosmopolis.
Yes, it's a city-state in itself.
Right, it is. I mean, this country doesn't just. The next biggest city is Birmingham, right? And Manchester. It's just a completely different league. There's no other city in Europe like it.
Yes.
There's only 3 cities above 10 million in population. It's Moscow, Istanbul, and London. And London was the only one within the EU.
Yes.
So there's that massive difference. And the rest of the country is very obedient and drilled and likes to have their shepherd's pie and so on. And there are a few mavericks which want to shake the system up. But still, I think that it's not, it's very much a keep calm and carry on mentality.
So when you say that
the revolution is unlikely to be in Britain, that's what I'm saying.
When you say Britain's a retirement home, you mean since 1945 and since we became a satellite of America?
I don't know if that's really why, but I think that people do not like to shake things up here. Even the politics, there isn't such a wide spectrum, right? They're still within. Corbyn was a bit of an outlier, but they're still within a broadly social market consensus. They're disagreeing on the particular issues of how to fund the NHS.
As we were saying last time, the left, as the old left had a critique of capitalism, saying we want workers' collectives, not CEOs. Now the new left says we just want a female CEO.
Right.
We're okay with the concept of having the shareholder corporatocracy.
Now, really,
we just want to change.
Really, they're competing. Who's more efficient in providing a female CEO? Really, like that's what I feel it's come to. So I don't think that. I think that there's a big difference in the fact that London hosts a lot of international billionaires.
Yes, and
compared to
financial
the rest
institutions
of the
or individuals.
Well, no, individuals live here, right?
Yes.
I mean,
but you think the individuals are key rather than the financial houses in the city?
No. I'm talking about that. Yeah, this city is very different from the rest of the country.
Rest of the nation. Okay.
And there's a lot of you feel poor living in London if you don't make a good salary because of the prices, right? But you might have urban riots here or something. But I think that Britain as a whole country, you don't have the Gilets jaunes here.
Yeah,
you had them in the 70s and the 80s, but
there was
gone.
There was a moment with Brexit where you had this return to empiricism, this return to a little hint of the John Bull, no nonsense. I'm not taking this rational superstate notion, and I want to return to something.
That's true. There was definitely
something.
I would say that's definitely the side. It was the empiricist arguments.
That is an old British notion which has been lost.
The Burkean philosophy is what triumphed.
Yeah,
at least intellectually, and the common sense.
Yes.
Also, so that combination of Rees-Mogg talking about the particular organic nature of the British Constitution versus the designed
of the Napoleonic Code,
right,
and civil law,
and the deeper things, and the fact that this country wasn't invaded by Napoleon or Hitler, and it has ties I don't actually think that it has stronger ties with Commonwealth than it does with Northern Europe.
No.
But nonetheless, there's a lot of people that feel that it's a more organic union for Britain to be part of Canada and New Zealand and Australia and
That's
even the
Five
United
Eyes.
States,
Yes, yes.
rather than
Yes.
Five Eyes is a arrangement which unites those countries, but they think about it more as a cultural rather than a security perspective.
Yes.
So that was part of it, but hey, Britain was really reluctant to join it in the first place. The European Union, de Gaulle didn't want them to join it, and then after some point they decided to leave it. So it's almost like on a grand meta scale of history. Yeah, maybe the empiricists and Rees-Mogg and kind of organicists, Burke's, right, were kind of right. It's not a natural fit to some extent.
So moving beyond that Brexit debate, you think that Britain hasn't achieved its moment of wake-up call relevant to where we're going to go geopolitically in the next century?
Where are we going to go? Where are we going to go when the
should be?
Well, yeah, a Brexit, what Nigel Farage argues is that you're going to have a global Britain, which makes sense if the United States was still kind of going for a globalized economy. Well, pushing for a globalized economy, right? If every major trading bloc, major economy decides to become protectionist or mercantilist or at least inward looking, a small island like Britain isn't really going to have great benefit from a non-internationalized economy. It had a great benefit from creating the first internationalized economy when it ruled the waves and it could just, send its boats into China, India, or the Crimea and demand free trade because it was the sole manufacturing power, right?
Yes.
We don't know. But then again, London does have a massive financial concentration of financial capital.
And
it's geared
within the Five Eyes scheme, it can be the portal to America for Europe and be the portal.
Well, it could still remain that even if it leaves the European Union. But the irony is that the guys these are the people that didn't vote for Brexit, at least for some of the top percent, which wanted this market speculation, which they could predict and they could make massive.
Short. Yes.
They could short, they could gamble, they could make massive amount of money on it, like Soros and whatever. I mean, although he's a globalist, but or some other people want to see Britain deregulate into some kind of Singapore. They also might have voted for Brexit, even though ideologically they're probably more inclined in a supranational framework.
Just a different one from the EU.
But the irony is that the guys that voted for Brexit are not going to get the benefits. And London might survive, but not the North or anybody else.
Yes, and we're not going to receive Dominic Cummings' renaissance in manufacturing we were discussing from June 2019. Yes, earlier in the week. That's really very much off the table right now.
I mean, it's very hard because what's funny is that British man. You have you heard of the English disease? Is what the Germans referred to Britain in after the Second World War. So British manufacturing began to slump back in the imperial days.
Yeah.
Because the economy financialized. What happened was that they would invest into the United States, Canada, Australia,
we can draw this graph. We can draw a Piketty graph of the separation of the worker from the financialized economy for the British Empire in parallel, or there was a cycle that existed in the British Empire, we're saying, and now in the early 20th century, and then now we can see it
in the
happening
1970s
again.
It became worse.
Yeah,
because Britain was still a manufacturing power, but it's just that its manufacturing was less competitive than that of Germany or the United States, right? So what the Germans developed is a sort of financial industrial complex because they didn't have an empire. Most of their financial conglomerates would reinvest into their economy.
Yes.
Britain had an empire and they felt that you're going to get bigger returns on building railroads in South Africa and mining gold there, rather than reinvesting into research and development in the north.
Well, yes, you saw, what was it? The first industrial revolution of steam, Britain won. But then the second and third industrial revolutions of
that's
chemicals
when the
and
United
electricity,
States and Germany
then
starts to
United
overtake
States and
them.
Germany
Yeah.
took it to the next level.
And what you have, another thing towards the beginning of the 20th century, is massive unionization of already uncompetitive industries. And by the 1940s and 50s, Britain, it was recovering a lot slower than the continent after the Second World War. And when in the 70s they did join the European and steel communities, all the steel and coal mines were absolutely outcompeted by continentals.
Yeah.
By the continentals, yeah.
So
yeah,
to draw this together, we haven't reached a moment, even with this COVID 1984 crisis, where you believe the British people have come to a moment of questioning what the point of Britain is going to be.
The death of the Queen is really going to be that point, because she was she became monarch under Winston Churchill, and Winston Churchill is a very interesting figure for me. So he was born in the, his life is an allegory of the British Empire to some extent.
Yes.
I mean, I love that, every film about Churchill starts with an 80-year-old man getting out of bed, and they all sound the same. It's through the storm, enter the storm, the darkest hour, it's raining outside, it's all the kind of same narrative of an old man leading this country through the war.
Oh yeah, he gassed the Kurds with Bomber Harris, and
but he has a very long, interesting career. He has a very long, interesting career.
Fucking up the world.
Well, whatever you want to
wars, and
whatever you want to say it. I mean, he wasn't, but it's just that his life, he was an old man when the Second World War started, and let's look at his life and what Britain was from the beginning to end. He was born in Blenheim Palace, right? As an aristocrat, how much more pompous could that birth be? He was descended. Yeah, exactly. He's descended from the Duke of Marlborough, because the Duke of Marlborough won the Battle of Blenheim. That's why they got Blenheim Palace, named after the famous battle. Then Churchill is involved in the last cavalry charge of the British Empire in the Sudan, which already tells you how the technology is changing.
Yes.
He changed the parliaments from the conservatives to the liberals to the conservatives, right? Back when the liberals was actually a force in parliament. Now they're not.
They're gone.
They're just not.
Yes.
And what's interesting is he dies in 1964, right?
Yes.
When the British invasion, when Britain completely changes, it becomes pop Britain. It's
cultural export.
The cultural revolution, right? The Beatles, David Bowie, the 60s, the swing. What's her name? Peggy, right?
Yeah.
He dies, and this is what he remembered as a cultural icon who has his fingers like this, V or peace, smoking a cigar.
Yes.
He's kind of like an iconic figure, like Che, which you have on your shirt, right?
Yeah.
And that's his life. So he goes from being pretty much Flashman to dying as some kind of like a Jimi Hendrix figure, smoking a cigar. The cigar could be full of fucking marijuana for all we know, right? But that's how he's remembered.
Yes.
And it's interesting. That's his lifespan, and that's how Britain changes from Blenheim Palace to peace out.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And that if they make a movie about it, that's what they got to make a whole allegory of Britain in the life of Churchill, rather than some old guy who gets out of bed, functioning alcoholic, and defeats the Nazis that way through his like stubbornness and intakes of whiskey.
Yes.
As if he was like in a stoop throughout the whole 6 years of the war, and he sobers up and like, wow,
we did it.
We did it. Yes. He's over. Yeah. It's over. Give me my paracetamol.
One long binge.
Exactly.
So now Churchill in the war is Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas to you. It's just one long bender that you take a lawyer along and your general staff.
Yeah, Atlee. or Smo was that Dutch guy he had. That's kind of how it is. He's like, we will never surrender. He's like, we can drink. Oh, we're not gonna run out of alcohol. But I mean, he doesn't care. he's been through so much shit in his life. By the time he's 80, he's leading the country. He's like, yeah, he's Lieutenant Dan. He's like, bring it, Hitler. I don't care, you know. I'm old and frail, and I'm gonna die one way or another.
Yeah.
But you know, let's do this. Yeah.
No. So that's one allegory of the British Empire. You think that then there's been this holding pattern under Elizabeth II where there's not been another decision made, or
no?
so
It's because her father was the last emperor of India, right? And Britain was still an empire when she came. It was classed a great power before the Suez crisis, right?
Eden, and America then told Britain and France, no,
before decolonization started, before Britain entered the European community, and before Britain exited the European Union, right? She's kind of like the Queen of England was kind of my psychological adjustment when I came to this country. People just call her the Queen.
Yeah,
but like, you know, the Queen of England is a brand, very powerful brand, and got ships named after her. Goddamn it, the Queen Elizabeth and so on.
Yeah,
it's you know, there's something about her where she's just one of these figures like the Pope, and that comes with time. That comes because she's been around forever, and because there's been other great queens in this country, like the other Elizabeth and Victoria, right?
Yeah.
So when she dies, there's not going to be another pompous coronation, I think, on the same scale as it was. And I think that a lot of the pageantry of the royal house is also going to diminish.
Well,
and this country
is be crowning a pensioner.
Right. But in this country, the brand is monarchy. Nobody really cares about that there's a monarchy in Spain or in Denmark.
Yeah, you hear
or
Americans
Norway.
referring to the Queen. You're right, and they refer to the Queen of England,
yeah,
not
it's
the Queen
place,
of Spain or
right?
Holland.
Exactly. It's the place that the monarchy has in American culture and the Americanization of global culture we saw over the. I feel that's going to also have reversals, but. That's important, right? What if Australia becomes a republic or so on? But that's going to be like one of those points where, wow, it's like when Franz Joseph died. The Austro-Hungarian Empire couldn't stick together. I think that's going to be interesting. Is that right? Is there going to be a complete decision to codify the Constitution? Is there going to be, you know, some massive radical rationalization of the system? Because
the checks and balances,
right? Is Buckingham Palace still going to be her office, or I mean, it's this overhang from the days of empire and from the days of Churchill, the pageantry, right? She goes in a golden carriage to summon Parliament. I think a lot of the ceremony is going to be simplified. Yeah. Why not? I mean, I doubt that, you know, when William becomes king, he's going to want to do that. It's just the times are different, right? She belongs to a period when the British wore bowler hats and then saw them shave their heads into mohawks and then grow their hair back out again. But like, you know, I think that's going to be like a big cultural shock, because Johnson is a little bit of like Napoleon III, who's trying to mimic Napoleon I, you know, in his desire to exactly the Churchillian
and
factor.
Pericles, though his Pericles and Augustus.
He's that sort of Victorian statesman obsessed with classicism, you know, like Palmerston and so on.
Yes.
But like he's kind of getting away with it for now. A lot of people like him. He's positive. Rather than Theresa May, which is actually like I value that.
The Maybot was just a disaster.
Oh God damn it! Yeah, it's just like you got your female CEO and they're underqualified. This one was.
So, in conclusion, we haven't reached, even with this COVID-1984 crisis, we haven't reached a tipping point. A moment where we look at
COVID will give you that tipping point. COVID will, once the economy has to start readjusting, we're gonna be in a very, very, very interesting world. I mean, oil is so low. What's gonna happen to the Middle Eastern countries? What's gonna happen to Russia?
Well, as we were seeing from our geopolitical examination the other day, which you'll be able to see on the channel at some point soon, that great game has shifted from the baton has been passed one phase at a time.
Yeah.
So it was Spain versus Britain, then Britain versus Russia, then Russia versus the United States, then the United States versus China.
Kind of.
And so we see this handing of the baton.
So who is the United States going to be?
Sides.
Who is going to going to be against?
Now,
you have one of the most ancient civilizations in the world now against, the new world. So really the center of gravity is shifting to the Pacific, Indo-Pacific region, right? It's not Eurocentric anymore. What's like Europe has kind of become what Europe is like what all white people do in diverse multicultural societies. They build a gated community,
like Florida.
Yeah, it's what it is. It's a gated community of old people in Vienna. It's like we're gonna have visa restrictions around us.
Yes.
Yes. And we're all gonna die because of the demographics in Europe. That's kind of what it is. It's one big retirement village.
Okay. So the
Turkish plumbers.
the iterative energy of new things is not going to come out of Europe or Britain.
Some things are, because in some ways I feel that there's such pressure on technological innovation in Europe from completely different reasons, right? For example, sustainability is probably any sustainable tech, any green tech. I think the revolution is going to come from Europe, just because the pressure is on them. They're a very peculiar subcontinent with a lot of historical cities. And if you live in a medieval Italian city, right, you kind of need to be sustainable. You can't like live as a wasteful life as in America on a big car where you drive everywhere, you get Super Mario, and you can waste energy that much. It's just like, the geography is determined to be otherwise, right? That just can't happen. So if anything, some technology to redevelop plastics or energy sufficiency, right? It's probably going to come from there.
It is fine within a paradigm of global trade, where Europe can be a startup accelerator for green tech, as you say, and that can then be exported. However, the problem is back to the great game, where maybe you can export that green tech to America a bit, but then China is going to use this as an opportunity to industrialize harder.
Yeah,
and so it's going to be a one-sided game of global environmental issue being used as a geopolitical pawn. The UN is going to preach something that the great powers don't practice. This is why the Paris Climate Accords broke down.
We're going to see a lot of inflation with the breakup of global supply chains. If we're not going to have our consumer goods imported from China or Bangladesh or whatever, and we want to make them locally, we might see some serious readjustments, like very interesting readjustments. But we don't even know where growth is going to. I doubt 5G and also on, right? We've already hit that when we've become the knowledge and information economy. That was the big thing. This is just increasing efficiency of the information economy, in my opinion. Blockchain and so on. Those are big leaps, but that's just a continuation of the trend. Yeah,
you can see it with the proliferation of cadet versions of big tech, whether it's Huawei in America taking American patents and then developing Chinese versions of that intellectual property and then exporting them itself, whether it's somewhere like Samsung, which then partners with Vietnam. So South Korea and Vietnam have this polarity, with Vietnam providing the manufacturing and South Korea providing the version of the big tech smartphone reality and the smart city.
But in a way, like what's going to be interesting, I think, is the role of robotics and I mean, even like forget China, we could get robots to do stuff, right? And energy is going to be cheap for a while, maybe, with oil prices being so low. Maybe we don't even need to. But the point is that the blue collar guy is not going to get his job back as he thought, because everything could be mechanized.
I think we're going to explore this more in the next episode, go into greater detail about the notions of big tech, what's going on with Tesla right now, China, where we're going with mechanization, AI, and automation, what we're seeing with coming out of Boston Dynamics and some of their robots. And we'll play some videos, go into some detail with different patents that are going on right now.
We need to colonize other galaxies.
Well, that's what Dominic Cummings wants with his permanent lunar base. And that's also what Elon wants with his trip to Mars. But on that note, I think we'll put a pin in this and come back next time for a big tech, health tech examination of some really key innovations that are going on now, some of the ways that can be democratically controlled or not. And with that, I'd like to thank Dan Kalupski, our resident historian, expert on geopolitics, economic analyst. And that's good night from Dan, good night from me, Laurenzo Mefsett, founder of the New Athens Blockchain Think Tank. And if you like the content, please leave a like. If you enjoy what we're doing here, please subscribe, share out the streams. They'll be coming in evenings in the coming week. We'll set out the timings and we'll be dealing with a variety of topics that are of global interest right now. We'll be getting guests on phone-ins and so on. So the infrastructure is increasing here at the New Athens from the bunker. Brought to you by Mornington Media. Thank you to Ollie. And we've also got quite intriguing. We're getting some drone footage coming in soon. So we'll be doing flyovers over abandoned London under lockdown to really see what's going on and doing analysis of architecture and art history, back with Philip Firsov, who's coming. So we'll have some really exciting stuff going on. And so thank you from me. Thank you for tuning in. Hopefully this has been informative and entertaining to a certain extent, and we'll be seeing you very soon. Catch you next time.
No, eso es quieto.